What is going on, guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another PS4 discussion video. So my last video was a bit rushed and I didn't manage to explain all the kind of information that I wanted to put across. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about a few different things about this new exploit that was released for 6.72, firmware version 6.72. Technically, the exploit was released up to 7.02, so it works up to 7.02. But there's no jailbreak for 7.02 because we need a WebKit exploit as well in order to be able to exploit the system. And the latest WebKit exploit is for 6.72, so that's why we can jailbreak 6.72 but not 7.02 yet until there's a WebKit exploit for 7.02. Also, I know a lot of you guys are waiting for me to make a tutorial on this, but unfortunately I won't have a tutorial up until everything's been updated to support the new exploit. So currently things like the WebKit hosts and the payloads and everything need to be updated to support the new exploit. Once that's all done, I will be able to make a tutorial for you guys. So the things that I want to talk about are what this means for the PlayStation 4 modding scene in general, and also how the exploit came to be, how it was disclosed, and how it was made public, because there's people being a bit confused about that. Like, did Sony make it public? Kind of strange. And why some people in the PS4 modding community actually see this as a bad thing, and they do have a point. Not saying I agree with them entirely, but there's a few people in the PS4 scene making this case, and it does make sense. So yeah, anyway, let's get into this. So first of all, what does this mean for the PlayStation 4 modding scene in general? Well, first of all, obviously, more people are able to now jailbreak their PS4s. People who were stuck waiting on 5.55 or 6.20, somewhere between 5.05 and where we are now, who didn't have a jailbreak, who have been waiting for God knows how long, they are now able to exploit their PS4s. So great for them. Also, it's now easier to get a jailbroken PS4, as there's a lot more consoles that are on 6.72 or lower than 5.05 or lower. So much easier to buy them. It'll be cheaper now as well. So a lot more people can now get into the PS4 modding scene for that reason. Also, modding and trainer developers can now make cheats and mods for newer games like Red Dead Redemption 2, Mortal Kombat, Spider-Man, Days Gone, etc. They'll be able to have a field day and mod a lot more games, and we can all enjoy cheats and mods for those newer games. Also, we can now run, obviously, newer games on our jailbroken PS4s. We're not stuck only being able to run games from mid-2018 or before then. And some people get a bit confused about what games are actually runnable on 6.72. A lot of people think that 6.72, if I look here, it says it was released on the 16th of July 2019. So people are like, well, 6.72 is great, but it's still a year old, so we can't run any games that came out in the last year. Now, that's not actually true, because 6.72 may have been released in July of 2019. However, it still remained the latest firmware for a few months before the next firmware came out. So actually, you'll be able to run games on your jailbroken PS4 that came out up until the next firmware that launched after 6.72, which was 7.00. So you can see that 7.00 was released on the 8th of October 2019. So you can actually run games all the way up to October 2019 on a jailbroken PS4 right now. And obviously, if we end up getting a 7.02 jailbreak, which is looking likely, we just need a WebKit exploit for 7.02, then we'll be able to run games up to like December of 2019, maybe even January or February 2020. So yeah, it's not a case of we're only going to be able to run games up to mid-2019, more like late 2019, and maybe eventually early 2020 games as well if a 7.02 exploit comes out. So you've got to bear that in mind. And the other thing that this means for the PlayStation 4 modding scene is hopefully we get more developers coming into the scene now that the barrier to entry is greatly reduced. Being able to get jailbroken PS4 is a lot easier now. And also we have Mira and the Open Orbis toolchain, so developers can make legal homebrew. They don't have to include any copyrighted Sony SDK stuff, so they'll be able to make legal homebrew, and now it's easier for them to come into the scene. So hopefully we'll get more developers making some more interesting apps and homebrew for the PlayStation 4, and it should hopefully revive the scene by quite a bit here. Yeah, those are kind of the benefits here of this new jailbreak. So The next thing I want to talk about is how this was disclosed, because people are getting confused as to did the Flow release it? Did Sony release it? If Sony released the exploit, why the hell would Sony release the exploit? Very interesting. And some people are saying, oh, it's great that the Flow didn't submit anything to Sony and he gave it to the community. And meanwhile, people are like, but wait, he did give it to Sony and he got a $10,000 bounty for it. So how did it get released? So people are confused clearly about this. So let me try and clear up some confusion here. So back in March of this year, March 11th, the Flow posted this tweet that says, also don't update past firmware 6.20 if you want a kernel exploit. He also asked if somebody could donate him a 6.20 firmware PS4. And of course, that led to people believing that he was working on a jailbreak. But for months and months and months, nothing seemed to be happening. However, at the same time, if we look at his post on HackerOne here, that he actually posted this to PlayStation's bug bounty program on the 21st of March. After he made that tweet, he gave the exploit to Sony. He reported it to Sony on the bug bounty program. Now, people are confused about this because the bug bounty program only went public in June. As you can see, it launched on June 2020. So how did he submit it months earlier? Well, it was kind of in a closed beta state for a while where only people that PlayStation actually invited, or maybe HackerOne staff actually invited to actually participate in the bug bounty program, those were the only people who were able to submit bugs and receive bounties for them. So the Flow was one of those people who received an invite and was able to submit this. So he submitted this on the 21st of March, and then it was reviewed by the HackerOne staff and PlayStation. Here they are right here. They say, thanks very much for the report. We have reproduced your findings. We have decided to rate the severity of the report as high and award you a $10,000 bounty. Thanks again. So PlayStation gave him the bounty, and then they fixed the exploit in firmware version 7.50, and that was that. And then the Flow requested that the vulnerability be made public. He officially requested it right here, requested to disclose this report, and it was eventually made public on July 6th. So this does raise some questions. So some people are saying, well, the Flow submitted it to Sony, so, he's not on our side kind of thing, but, he did request it to be made public. And then the other thing is, okay, so the Flow requested the disclosure of the report, so that's good. That shows that the Flow did want to make it public, not just take the bounty and keep it private. However, why the hell would PlayStation allow this to get out? Why would they allow it to be made public? As you can see here, it says, hi Andy, this is from a staff member. It says, hi Andy, the PlayStation team will approve disclosure of this report. Are you comfortable with all the content in the back and forth comments being made public? If so, we'll proceed. And then it gets made public that same day. So yeah, PlayStation actually approved this to be made public. Why would they do that? So as far as I'm concerned, there's a few different reasons why. Obviously, they might just want to keep their relationship with the hacker community intact, and if they refuse to release it, maybe that would harbor some ill will towards them. That's kind of less likely. The other likely thing is that it was probably going to get leaked out anyway at this point, because other developers like Fire30 on Twitter, who has had probably the same vulnerability as the Flow. I mean, he may not have been able to fully exploit it in the same way that the Flow has, but that vulnerability was known to multiple developers. Maybe they didn't all have a full exploit. Maybe they didn't all exploit that vulnerability to the same point where they were able to read and write to the kernel. Maybe they were only able to just get read access to the kernel, like Fire30, who was constantly dumping every new kernel version that came out using that vulnerability. And coincidentally, he hasn't released a dump for 7.50 or 7.51. I wonder why. Probably because that vulnerability has been patched, because it was the same vulnerability that the Flow reported to Sony. So other developers know about this vulnerability, and they could easily post it publicly, or if the Flow really wanted to release it publicly, he could have done it anonymously anyway. So I guess Sony would have realized that this was going to get out anyway, and if they are the ones who approve it to be disclosed, then it it looks better on their part. And the other thing is, this is a much better outcome for Sony than what could have happened. In an alternative universe, let's say this bug bounty program never existed, then what could have happened is the Flow could have just released this exploit on 7.51 because it wouldn't have been known, it wouldn't have been patched in 7.50 or 7.51. So the Flow could have gone ahead and released the exploit, the kernel exploit, just posted it on Twitter, a full kernel write-up. People could have implemented it, and then every single PlayStation 4 in existence would be vulnerable, would be exploitable. And that would cause Sony to go into panic mode and have to rush out an update super quick to patch it. That would not have looked good for Sony, and so many PS4s would be jailbreakable. It wouldn't have been a good situation for them. Whereas what they've done here is just paid off a hacker 10 grand to report the vulnerability to them, and then they can discreetly patch it in the next firmware version, 7.50, which they did, and then wait a few months for most people who have PS4s, especially the ones who use PSN and connect online. They will have all updated to that firmware version after a few months' time, so a lot less PS4s would be exploitable. And now that they've chosen to disclose it now, then there's a lot less people out there who have jailbreakable PS4s because they've already updated to 7.50, and the damage caused by this exploit is much, much less than it would have been if they didn't have this bug bounty program and the Flow just posted this. If he posted it on the latest firmware version, people could have even maybe got online with a jailbroken PS4 and started screwing around with PlayStation Network and PSN. I know there's security challenges and checks and stuff, so maybe not, but you never know. It would have been a bad situation, whereas with this situation, Sony had plenty of time to discreetly release a patch to fix it, sit on this exploit for a few months so that it would be patched in most people's PS4s who update to the new firmware version, and then disclose it a few months later where it's not going to cause as much damage. Definitely makes more sense to me, and I assume those are the reasons why Sony agreed to make this public. Now, the reason that some people in the PS4 scene and other developers are unhappy with the Flow for releasing this or for reporting it to Sony, because if they keep it private, then it might be present in the PS5. You know, if Sony doesn't know about it, it could easily find its way into the PS5, and then when the PS5 launches, we could have a PS5 jailbreak and a PS4 jailbreak on the latest firmware at the same time, which would be incredible. But because the Flow reported this to Sony, it's been patched in the latest firmware version for the PS4. It will also be patched in the PS5 as well, assuming the PS5 has a similar WebKit setup and operating system set up to the PS4, which is quite likely. So that's why some people are kind of upset about the Flow for releasing this prematurely. I do think we were so close to the PS5 launch anyway at this point. I mean, it's coming out in November. If he just waited 5 more months, then we might have seen a PS5 jailbreak. Whereas because he disclosed it now, there's no chance of that really happening. I mean, of course, there could still be a PS5 jailbreak. That's a completely new console. There could easily be new vulnerabilities in the PS5 that are not present in the PS4. Who knows? But, we had a chance that this vulnerability could have slipped its way into the PS5 and we could have a PS5 jailbreak. Now, unfortunately, that is not the case. So that is why some people are unhappy, because it's been private for all this time. It's been private for like 2 years at this point. This vulnerability has been known about and kept private by developers. We only had to wait 5 more months and it could have been in the PS5. But now all that waiting is kind of, for nothing now. So, well, not for nothing. Obviously, we now have a 6.72 jailbreak instead of, like, if they released it when they first discovered the vulnerability, we'd have a 5.55 jailbreak and still not be able to run newer games. Now we have a 6.72 and possibly a 7.02 jailbreak eventually, which is a lot better than a 5.55 jailbreak. But if you just waited 5 more months, it could have even been a PS5 jailbreak and the latest firmware on the PS4, whatever firmware version that ends up being when the PS5 launches. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame. That is why some people are upset about this release. So yeah, and just some closing thoughts here. With this bug bounty program, what I find interesting is when you look at the hacktivity, this was disclosed and Sony considered this to be a high vulnerability. So this was a high priority bug that was reported, and the Flow got $10,000 for it. What interests me is that there is other people here who are getting other large bounties, larger bounties, like this guy here, $15,000. And then you've got, further down, you've got, I mean, this guy right here, this is insane, $25,000. 4 months ago, he reported this bug. So obviously that's a critical bug because it's above 10,000. $25,000 he got there. And then further down, the same guy gets $40,000 as well for another bug report made 6 months ago. So I wonder what that could be. I mean, $40,000, $25,000. Clearly, Sony considers it a much more critical, bug than what the Flow disclosed. And what the Flow disclosed is a pretty big deal. So who knows what the $25,000 or $40,000 bounty was for? Maybe a full jailbreak, maybe like a full untethered jailbreak writing custom firmware. God knows. It could be something completely unrelated to jailbreaking the system though. But I mean, $40,000, $25,000. So something tells me that those bugs are probably not going to be disclosed. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video or found the information useful, and I will hopefully see you guys in the next one.